In this video, we have the Barell Springs. And if you pay attention in the RC Drift world, you know that everybody, for some reason, is talking about these springs and why they must be the best thing in the world. I guess some dude used them and won a competition somewhere or something, and now everybody is throwing caution to the wind and saying that Barell version 1 or Edge Flex Spring version 2 is somehow now the best spring that you could possibly use. So I have a set of them here. I have a set of version 1, which is like an 8-wind, 27mm long spring, or we have the version 2, which is the 6-wind, 27mm long. I'm going to put them here on my RC Drift car, and I'm going to test them versus what I have on there now. I'm also going to use my spring tester to see what spring rate they are. Are these things somehow magical, or are they just another spring that's out there that just happens to have a pretty good spring rate? I'm honestly a little bit skeptical, but, I'm open to trying it. Let's get into it by getting the spring tester out and seeing what kind of spring rate it says and what that compares to with other drift springs. I'm going to get version 1 out here first. Set the spring in underneath the tester. Then you push it down. This one's on the 8mm. That is an 18.125 stiffness. That is very stiff. And version 2 is supposed to be an even stiffer spring. Oosh. That's a 26. That's a 20. When I say these things are stiff, I'm going to give you an idea of just how stiff they really, really are. When you look at MST 29mm, 7s, 8s, all the way down into the 4s. I think what I have on the rear of this car right now is literally the 4s. 6s, 3s. I mean, when you look at extreme soft coil sets that we normally run in RC Drift, we're literally talking about these kind of forces. And I think it's really interesting that they're going with a shorter spring that's super higher rate, because here's, I think, what's happening. And let me be clear. I may be wrong about this, okay? But here's how my mind typically works. I use a taller spring. You can see this is a 31mm. This is a 27. This is the version 2 here. So what I do is I design my suspension. I set up my shocks and everything to where this spring is sitting down in compression. If you're a crawler person, you know this is droop, right? I sit the suspension down in, and that way it has ability to ride up and down over the bumps of the track. When I get on the gas and I want the thing to compress, it has compression. If it's on the front and I get on the gas and it wants to extend, it has extension, and it has length of spring in order to help that come up. What they are actually suggesting is, I watched other videos of people, writing reviews and reading the guidelines from this spring, is they don't want you to run any preload. So what they're doing is they're giving you a 20 stiffness spring, which is kind of what I'm at once I'm way down here, right? Once I'm in droop, I've built up some force against it, and that's exactly what they're giving you with this. That's my guess. That's my guess, and that's why they are so adamant in the guidelines of don't run preload. Because if you run any preload with a spring that's this stiff, it's gonna be a rock solid, right? It's never gonna move. I want to give you an example here, real world kind of example of what I'm talking about. We'll swap these other springs on and compare. So battery's in, body is upside down on in order to act like some weight. All right, suspension is very soft, but also look. Right, so suspension sitting in, if I pull up, there's room to go up here. Well, it's not a lot. They're sitting down in the suspension travel, and there's some ability to go up. And testing, these are factory springs testing acceleration and movement of the car. What I noticed in that video is the front end is very active, but the rear end actually still isn't doing a lot. I made this rear motor and I actually haven't done anything to the rear suspension since, and I'm wondering if it's a little bit too soft of a spring back here in the rear now with all that weight dangling out that far over the rear. So it moves up and down nice and free, but it might not have enough spring back there now. So it's a good baseline. That's where I was before. Car was fast, car did well. My ride height's currently just a little over 10 millimeters. Maybe we'll call that 12. 12 millimeters sitting there. It's not exact, it's sitting off of this thing and everything, but about 12 millimeters. Let's swap over some of these springs to the front and just see exactly. It has to sit down lower because the springs are shorter, but then it's going to just sit at the top of the travel. It's not going to have anywhere to go. Let's see. I don't know. That's my guess. Let's see. Well, the thing said use without preload, but I think that's probably not the goal here. Yeah, I still have clearance if I do it that way. What is it? So we went from like 12 millimeters to 2 millimeters. So unfortunately, if I want any kind of ride height, I'm going to have to run some kind of preload on it. All right, what I've done is I've added preload to get it back to about the same ride height that it was. It's actually at like 9, so it's still at a lower ride height than what it was. It feels okay. It doesn't feel overly like in compression, especially the first little bit of compression. It still feels great, which is really surprising for how stiff those springs were. But what's interesting to me here is I do have a little bit of preload. Look. Got a little bit in there, but what happens is the shock now can travel further than the spring. Like I can actually come up and my shock actually I lose, you can see right here, right there if you look real close, it actually just comes loose, which means that I have less up travel now because the spring can only push so far. And the car's not going to magically go further than the spring, even if the shock has that potential travel. So, I don't know. Let's see. Note, I did make one other obnoxious change, which is I had the wrong tires on the car. I had my carpet tires. Oof. You don't want to run carpet tires out here and get them all scuffed up. So I had to yank them back off. So we will have a rear tire difference as well. Boo, sorry on screwing that up. Barrel springs on the front only. Version 1 on the front only. Alright, rear ride height that we're looking at here, same kind of metric, factory, or how I had it previously set, which is too soft, somewhere around 6-7 millimeters. Alright, and here we're just showing how absolutely massively stiff that spring is. So took all the preload out of it, it's absolutely just sitting at the top of the suspension. It's not even, we have nothing on it. Ride height's now 15 millimeters. Just nothing you can do. It's just absolutely as stiff as a board. Front version 1, rear version 2. Okay, what I saw of that one is just the rear's way too stiff. Like, there's still a little bit of movement there. Kudos to it. Like, it still tried to move a very, very small amount, but the rear just wasn't doing anything. Kind of like it was just nothing. It was way too strong. Front still moved a little bit, but I think without the rear doing anything, it seemed like the car was just more flat and stiff as a board. So I'm going to swap the springs, front and rear, put the softer version 1 on the rear and the stiffer, just way too stiff stuff on the front, and see what it does. Harder version 2 in the front, and for some reason they feel better up there. Isn't that odd? Still sitting, yeah, not, well, we're sitting at the top of the spring, not at the top of the shock. You can see again the shock just completely pulling away from the spring. So again, unfortunately, we can get a little bit of lift, but it's just not gonna, I just don't understand what this group is talking about with these super duper stiff springs. On the rear, getting a decent ride height out of it, took all the preload out of it again. With the softer version 1, it makes more sense. It's still really stiff though, really, really stiff. Version 1 in the rear, version 2 in the front. What we saw that time was the front just way over stiff, just sat at the top of the spring, and even brakes and acceleration, you move a little bit, but the front of the car just isn't moving. And the rear isn't really either, because it's too stiff back there as well. I don't understand it. I don't understand it. There's been multiple people that have said, throw stiffer springs, especially at the front. And I think where I get from that, if you read the words that are really part of these Barell Spring marketing, it's a quick and dynamic, super responsive, super stable spring system. So I can understand that. If you are the kind of driver, the real hard flick and set it there, it will be very dependable. The stiffer the spring, the more dependable that turn and that flick will be. It's the same thing over here, right? Like, literally tomorrow, my son and I are going to go autocross this thing for the first time ever. And yeah, with a full-size car, if you want quick and responsive, improved performance, you stiffen the springs and sway bars and all that kind of stuff. But you still need the suspension to suspend. And we're not suspending, we're just sitting on like hard blocks. So maybe this car that I have, maybe this chassis that I'm running is just too light. And the truth is, I believe so little of what I see on the internet, because so much of it appears to just be people parroting back what they hear from someone else. Oh, Bob did it, so it must be a good idea, versus folks actually testing it themselves. Fast forwarding a little bit, I've done a bunch of research on kind of how to use these Barell springs and what the theory is that people are doing. And what we kind of find is there's two different kind of trains of thoughts generally in the RC community for how to set up your RC drift car springs. I tend to let my springs sit about halfway down in the travel. That way it makes sense to me. As the car drives, it has both up travel and down travel, and I can get a bunch of weight transfer. And what you see is like the extreme version of this is all those load transfer folks who want their car to like really angle over and really show a lot of movement. The other side of the coin, and it's kind of the trend at the moment in some of the competition space, is really stiff springs, and you're kind of sitting the car on top of the spring. And these Barell springs specifically, they have a little bit of squish at first before they get harder. So the whole concept is it's much more responsive. So you go into a corner and you're looking for that performance, snappy driving, it's gonna be there. So are these springs really the best choice right now in RC drifting? I don't think it really is. Very rarely is there a best. And with springs like this, where you really only have two spring rates, it's kind of hard to say that, you know, it's gonna be a one size fits all for so many different people. But I have more testing I wanna do here. So this is the preliminary kind of test experiment with these springs. If you have any questions about what I've done, please leave them down in the video comments. If you have personally used these Barell springs and you have an idea of really the benefits of them, again, please leave that down in the video comments so we can talk about it down there. Next steps for me is I'm going to take these to my local drift track, and I'm going to let everybody try them. We're going to take them there, and I'm going to do back-to-back kind of my theory of spring setup versus these, and then I'm going to let the other folks that are there, whoever wants to, try them out on their cars as well so we can get that feedback. So if you're curious about that video, there'll be a Drift Tech playlist popping up over here to your right, and I suggest please staying connected to there because that's where you're going to see it. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.